Welcome to part 2 on my little series on how to run heists in RPGs. So today we're talking about how to actually prepare your heist session before you start running it. And I'm sorry to say, GMs, this is going to be more work than you would normally doing. It's actually going to be much, much more work. Because this is almost entirely your job in a heist. Is you set up the world, they play around in it. You kind of get the short end of the stick, but it's all worth it because if you pull it off, everyone's gonna say you're a genius, even though it was it was them who did it. But regardless, so let's start with the most basic thing you're gonna need to plan. You're gonna need a premise. Most likely you already have this if you're watching this and you want to know how to pull it off. Or maybe you're going in fresh. But so your premise would be, what is it they're heisting and why? In my old game, my players were tasked with stealing secret plans from a war hero turned planetary governor who was suspected to be about to rebel and try to secede from the Imperium. So they were trying to steal secret plans, which are a great MacGuffin. Secret plans. Everyone always wants to steal those in a heist. So they were trying to steal secret plans from his desk that was in his estate. But you're also going to need a reason that they can't just immediately solve the problem the way they normally do. You need to find a reason they can't just go in guns blazing. For me, it was the fact that, he's a planetary governor, so he's got the entire planet's military. But he also was an ex-soldier, and all of his old war buddies were constantly in the area. He was surrounded by troops at all hours of the day. His estate was super heavily guarded. I just made it clear to the players that there was a lot more than they could take on in a frontal assault. At the end of this series, we're actually going to be designing a new RPG adventure that you guys are all willing to take and rip off and use whatever you want from it. We're going to be designing that for Pathfinder. And the premise we're going to be using for that one is that a king, or I suppose a prince, had the royal crown stolen. Or it was stolen from him by a dragon. He cannot be coronated until he has the crown back. The twist as to the reason why the players can't pull it off, why they can't just slay the dragon, is it's significantly higher level than them. And I would say on the way to fight that dragon, they should fight a dragon that they know is around their level, just to show them, this was a young black dragon you guys just fought, and that almost killed you. This is an ancient black dragon, or what have you. Whatever age of black dragon, but they know that the thing they fought was already really hard, and they can't fight something bigger. So, rather than drone on about that, it's also very important, I would say, to give your players an obvious best time to strike. And in a sense, that sounds like you're just giving it to them, like they're not going to have to plan. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to attack then because that's when the GM said is going to be the best time to strike. But I don't mean like you're dropping it to them on a platter. I mean like there's going to be an event that would be a suitable distraction, or a day when the security is going to be weaker, and make sure the players know this right away. For me, it was the Unity Ball, which was a yearly soiree of all the planetary nobility as they celebrated the reconquest of the planet from the rebels. Of course, made ironic because of the fact that they're about to rebel. But regardless, so there's that yearly ball. The players know security is going to be weaker on the day of the ball. There's going to be lots of crowds of people. Everyone's going to be distracted. So the players, all I had to do was say, hey, here's a Unity Ball. Here's what it is. And the players were like, all right, we're going to attack that day. You could do something similar. You could say, Like if it's a medieval thing, maybe the Dark Keep opens up only one day of the year to accept tribute from the peasants, or whatever. But honestly, if you can get away with a ball of some sort, it works very well. Players like that. Everyone likes the chance for their player to get to be James Bond for a couple sessions. And it just plays to a lot of tropes. People like it, but don't feel constrained. Do whatever fits your setting, whatever you like, and depending on whatever heist movies it was you watched in preparation, whatever fulfills the genre tropes you're aiming for. So after that, here's where the meat of your work comes in. You're going to need to have 3 very important pieces of documentation. You're going to need your map, your character list, and you're also going to need an event schedule. Now, I mean, if you're anything like me, your GM notes are a mess of scribbles, and they don't make sense to anyone who is not yourself. But you're going to want to be a little neater this time. Not only are you doing more work, but you're going to have to be neater about it, because these documents should also serve as handouts. This is a really weird style of play, because 90% of the info you have made should also be available to the players ahead of the time. Maybe you're just going to give them a lot of it, but they should also be able to earn the majority of it. It's not like a dungeon crawl where they're not going to have the layout of the room until they walk into it. And they're not and they're even then they don't see where the traps are and stuff like that. This isn't like that. If they find the blueprints, they should have the map of the estate, or the heist location, or whatever. They should be able to earn all of your GM notes, really, except for that like 5% you need to pull off your twist. So let's start with the map. So the map is, of course, very straightforward. The heist is likely going to revolve around a single location where the MacGuffin is held. So it should be very thoroughly mapped out. My own story took place on a small but extremely extravagant estate. There were guard towers all over the place surrounding it, kind of like a chain link and hedge fence that went all the way around the estate. The lower floor was primarily made up of a banquet hall, a kitchen, a library, a trophy room. A bunch of offices were on the top floor, as well as bedrooms, and for the most part, that was it. Now, the banquet hall was a 2-story structure, with the upper floor being made up entirely of transparent glass, which was just kind of a unique feature to think about. It meant that the players ended up using that. When they discovered that was made of glass, they were like, okay, well, we can have our sniper up on a rooftop and he can see everything on both floors. So you can just have little twists, little weird things like that, and the players will often just find a way to manipulate it. So I also wrote out actually 3 different versions of the map, and I would recommend you do so as well. I had my base floor plan, which I was not stingy about handing out. The players actually had a inside man who recently died but passed on all their notes to the players, so they got a big bundle of info right away going into the heist, and that included the basic floor plan. However, so after drawing out the floor plan, I also had secondary versions of the floor plan. One that had guard postings and where they would patrol, and another version of the map that had where all the cameras were. You might have a second version of the map with the traps if it's a fantasy setting, or any number of other things that you might want to hide in the map. But make sure these things are scattered throughout the world. Your players should be able to find these things. Heists are all about preparation. They're not about tricking your players. It's about, if the players are prepared, they should know these things. So don't hide it too deep. Make sure it's possible to get. Someone somewhere knows this stuff, and you got to decide who. So then the next up is going to be your character document. This is every single important character that you can think of that's going to be important for them to have in a heist. If there's a weak point in security, if there's a guard who seems like they're a weak link or has gambling debts, write that guy down. Obviously write or provide most of your effort on the main characters, but you are seriously going to want to write out a lot more characters than you normally would. And this is because you need it documented. This is not a style of game where you can very easily improv characters on the fly. I mean, sure, you can do it, but it breaks the rules a little bit if all the documents they were able to collect had all these different people, and then this super useful person who you just made up wasn't on the list and wasn't in their prep work. That kind of betrays their trust a little bit. So you're going to want to try and make every single person you can think of on your list of characters. Now, I made a mistake when I was running it, and it was forgivable, but it still stands out as kind of a black mark on that adventure for me. I forgot that the estate needed a technician, and the players ended up trying to find the estate's technician, and they found one. I was not prepared. The players were a little bummed that it wasn't there, but they moved past it pretty quick. But it still kind of felt like a breach of trust that there were important NPCs that weren't in their documentation. So you are going to want to document every single character you can, and it's going to take time. So then the last, and by no means the least, piece of document you're going to need is the itinerary or the schedule. So remember how I said that we're going to make an obvious best time to strike? You're not going to want to make that months in the future. You're probably going to want to make that like a week, because you are going to be planning quite seriously, and this is going to be awful, but you're going to do it. You're going to have from the time the players start and when the obvious time to strike is, you're going to plot out every single thing you possibly could fit into the schedule there, because again, this is the kind of things that the players can gain access to. They can get different kinds of schedules, but you'll also need to know if they go there at this time, where is everybody, what's happening. If you can give the illusion of this being a real breathing world, that's great, but that's actually not the objective here. The objective here is to have lots of info the players can find. And again, this is why it's so much work on the prep work, is because you need to just build mountains of data. Even if you don't think it's important, that doesn't mean the players won't find a way to exploit these things. And that's what you want. You want your players to take this mountain of just random data you made, and you want them to form a plan based on it. So I wrote for my game, I wrote just one, but I regret that. I would say you should make probably a few. I wrote one that just had the general plan and itinerary for the estate that included things like business meetings on the week leading up to the heist, the supplies that were coming in shipments, all that kind of stuff. But I would have made separate documents if I were to do it again. I would say I would have made one document for what were the nobility doing. What was Romulus Corellia, the planetary governor? What was he doing kind of on a day-to-day basis leading up to there? Because, you know what? He probably had an assistant that was tracking that, but I just lumped it in with everything else. When the shipments and stuff come in, what goes out, that could stand to be its own schedule. If there are people who work there, if there are staff, I'm sure they have a staff schedule. So make that a separate document. You also consider maybe the guards are on a different document entirely. And of course, scatter these things all through your world. And you're going to want to have different unique things. You're probably not going to think too much of it, but your players are going to go, oh, well, we managed to get these schedules, and we see that person's going to be there at that time, and we want to exploit that, but at the exact same time, something else we wanted to exploit is happening. So how are we gonna do both? And things you didn't mean to be interesting decisions all of a sudden are, because again, the players are running this game. I'm gonna say that 100 times. You're all gonna be sick of it, but the players are running this game. You are just planning. You are making mountains of data, and they are making sense of it. Okay, so one more thing. You're also going to want to consider the possibility of making a background secret schedule that the players cannot find, and that's going to be stuff that wasn't planned really by anyone in there. Like on Tuesday night, an unexpected guest arrives, and that could have repercussions. Or the shipment is late on this day, and that's a secret document that you have and the players do not have. That's one of the that they cannot get. I mean, that's one of that like 5% of things that the players are not going to have access to. So actually, that should be the majority of what you're going to need. It should be everything you need to set up your location, your time document, and your characters. And for the most part, you're done planning. There are a few more things, but we're actually going to discuss those in the next video, simply because they fit in a little bit better, because they are elements that are there specifically to make it more interesting when you run the game. So we're going to discuss that in part 3, which is how do you run the heist itself? How do you manage the table? All that kind of stuff. So we will be back next week not next week. We will be back tomorrow with how to run a heist, part 3. So, as I said last time, I have no idea if we're going to continue this YouTube channel after this series is done, but feel free to heist that subscribe button. Let me know if you want to see other stuff. I'm more than willing to discuss other RPGs and give other guides if I can think of any, campaign stories, whatever. So, I'll see you guys next time in part 3.